Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Cage of Nightingales by Elizabeth Hopkinson. So this is an odd little book, and I was really nervous about it when I picked it up because I was having a bit of trouble getting into it. But once I did, I really liked it. So Cage of Nightingales is about two boys in a version of 18th century Italy, both growing up in a school for music. Tammo is a charity student whose entire family died in a fire that left him scarred and his voice a rough, scratchy sound that makes him a bit of a pariah in this world where music is seen as holy, and at least from what I could gather, singing is seen as significantly more holy than other forms of music. It's seen as a way to bring you closer to the Archangel Michael, the city's patron. And Tammo hates it at this school where he's constantly bullied. But the one thing he likes is he gets to play the flute. He dreams of being a bird charmer, able to go out into the woods and play his flute and call birds down from the trees. And one day, chance brings him to meet Carlo, the school's star pupil, a eunuch, well on his way to being starting a glorious career at the opera. And they pretty much immediately become fast friends, declaring themselves sworn twins, and together they will be able to do miracles. When they meet the Archangel himself, they each ask a boon for the other, and the angel agrees, though he warns that there will be a cost, and they will need to stay together, relying on each other to accomplish their goals. But of course, life progresses, and when life separates them, will they be able to retain the connection they need and value more than any other? Okay, so I do want to start this review by saying, yeah, it took me a really long time to get into this book. It starts super slow. The first 100 pages or so are just the two building their relationship, which means that, yeah, when we do get to the actual, action, when things start happening, at least I found that I cared a lot more about these characters and about their relationship than I would have otherwise. But if you're not the kind of reader who's going to be interested in two boys basically falling in platonic love at first sight and then slowly building a real friendship from that, it's going to be slow going for you. But what made me keep with this book and what made me really interested in it was the characters. Tammo is a little bit more of a traditional book character, like a book hero. He does feel a little bit more like the kind of hero you'd find in a lot of books. He's a young man who's angry about his lot in life. He's bullied and willing to fight back and has a temper problem. And he's a fine character. There's just enough interesting there to hold me in. But Carlo is wonderfully unusual. First of all, he is charming. But it's a very practiced charm. Like, he is actively choosing to come across as charming, and he's choosing to come across as this, slightly flirtatious, silly, sweet boy. But he's also the picture of innocence, and that match of affected but also very innocent is really cool. He reminds me a little bit of characters like Pamela and Joseph Andrews, which is time period appropriate, but also in the way that he is a very devout character. He's intensely kind. He is pretty self-sacrificing, and he's the kind of character that could feel vaguely puritanical, especially when you add in the fact that he is asexual but deeply romantic. But at the same time, the fact that the book is very clear that he is asexual. It's not directly stated, of course, because that word wouldn't have existed in this world, but it's made pretty clear that it's not just a matter of he's ignoring his desires because that's what God would want. No, he just doesn't feel that. But also, there is his heightened language, which both really fits the time period and also just makes him a very interesting character. He sounds like he wandered in out of a Restoration comedy, and it really makes him just different. And of course, there's the fact he's a eunuch. He's a castrati, which, if you don't know the actual history, it was a thing in the 18th century to have boys who were under the age of puberty castrated so that they maintained their more soprano, high-pitched voice. It was seen as a voice of an angel. And yeah, the book does also a little bit tackle the fact that this is not a choice. The boys did not necessarily choose this, and how horrifying that could be, and how limiting it is, because there really is only one place in society left for them, and it is singing. But it's also just, I will say I think this is the first book I've ever read with a... Actually, no, it's not. I was going to say it's the first book I've ever read with a eunuch as a protagonist. And no, I read another book where there's a castrati main character. But it is super rare. And I really appreciate the fact that this one used that particular element to explore gender fluidity. Now, Carlo is a slightly more feminine character, and he is not ashamed of showing his feminine side. In fact, he's perfectly willing to live into it. And there are a couple of the others in the eunuch class that are slightly more feminine. There is one who dresses in a dress at one point and puts on makeup. And there are comments in passing that show that some of the eunuchs are attracted to girls and some are attracted to boys. Now, I do have a little bit of a qualm with the fact that the only people we see exploring gender fluidity are the ones who are eunuchs, which does intrinsically tie gender expression to genitalia. But at the same time, I feel like it is sort of part of the world. Because, yeah, if you are looking at something that is very historically accurate to Italy in the 18th century, which this book is, there were not that many social stratas you could be part of where you could explore a little bit of gender fluidity. And it ends up to me coming across as more just a way of exploring the lines and the fluidity of gender in general. But also having a, gender fluid character in the 18th century in Europe that is 110% historically accurate. And I will say, Tammo is occasionally made uncomfortable or just downright confused by Carlo's more feminine side. But I also sort of like that being in there because he still loves him, he still accepts him, he's still devoted to him, and it comes across as part of the character arc of, because, he is the one of the two that is a little bit more shy about this relationship from the beginning. It's very clear that he's not entirely sure what this relationship is, and he's a lot more shy about being affectionate. And it feels cute, and it feels like his character arc of developing into seeing both this relationship as something incredibly valuable, but also seeing Carlo and all the elements that make Carlo unusual intrinsically valuable. And their relationship is 100% the strongest part of the book. This is a relationship book. And I sort of love that even with that, we don't have a big falling out between them, like so many relationship-based books feel the need to throw in. There is no third act breakup here. There is conflict, but it's almost all external. And I like that. There's also minor moments of conflict. Like, there are cute moments where they're clearly just missing each other communication-wise. There are moments where they're at cross purposes to each other. And even, interestingly enough, in the happy ending, you can still see that they could be at cross purposes in the future, but they're still devoted to each other. They still care about each other. They still have that deep connection. And it comes across as really sweet and really cute. But I do also want to talk about the world building here because it is incredibly interesting. First of all, this book is insanely close to being just historical fiction, not historical fantasy. Like, much of the world building is literally just 18th century Italy. I am 99.9% sure that this particular city didn't exist, and presumably that this particular music school didn't exist, but it might very easily have been real. Like, it fits. The only thing that makes this fantasy is the fact that A, the Archangel Michael appears, B, there's a little bit of magic bird charming, and C, there's a miracle. And you'll notice that 2 out of 3 of the things that are magic are also Christian, which makes this a very Christian book, but not in any kind of evangelical way. First of all, the city here, their religion is significantly more focused on the angel than it is on God, Mary, or Jesus. It's a bit like the cult of Mary in that, it is at its core intrinsically Christian, but at the same time there's a separation there. There's a focus on something else that just keeps it a little bit further afield to what most modern Christianity looks like. Also, the book manages not to be judgy, pretty much at all. Like, there is a lot of random characters praying. There are moments when characters are being like, oh, it is my fault because I sinned, this happened. But then the Archangel Michael himself appears to say, nope, not your fault, that's not how this works. God is not punishing you or anyone else for your misbehavior. And there is some teasing with there are some moments of characters being teased about their sexuality, but not in the way you'd expect in a very Christian book. Like, it's never aggressive, it's never violent, and it's never really targeted at the gender of their, paramour. It's literally just like, dude, don't go running off with your paramours. That's seen as inappropriate, but, like, there doesn't seem to be any judgment here in whether that paramour is male or female. And at the same time, it's not so open that you're like, this feels inaccurate. In the end, it felt really accurate to the time and felt really apropos. But what I really loved about it is that this is a book that is about Christianity, but treated in a way that almost feels like a fantasy religion. So that you get to sort of see Christianity from the outside and without the, fraught emotions of writing about a modern religion. And in the end, it's just really interesting, and it also does highlight the fact that what we think of as Christianity does not look the same throughout the centuries. Like, a lot of people just sort of assume that the current Christian morals are what you'd see if you were in medieval Europe, and absolutely not. Like, oh my god, the different things that were considered acceptable at different times, what was considered sinful at different times, wildly different. And I like the fact that this book does sort of address that pretty head on. And, like, overall, there's a lot in this book that does sort of address the realities of the world without, at the same time, making it too in your face, if that makes sense. On that note, there are some things that appear in this book, like most historical fiction, that is apropos to the time and place, but are things we wouldn't say or do nowadays. For example, there is one character who has lost the use of her legs. She is in a wheelchair, and she is referred to as a cripple a couple of times. Similarly, there are very few people of color in this book, and they are all footmen. And I am pretty sure that it wasn't just their uniform. I'm 90% sure I do remember them being referred to as maroons, which is the time period appropriate word, but at the same time, yeah. And also, like, Tamo's, the way he thinks about women is not always super great, but it all feels like part of the world, and none of it feels malicious. And, like, there's just enough drawing attention to it that it feels like, hey, this is part of the world. It's not something that we approve of. And in general, like, there's a lot of other things in this book, that the world is played with, examined, and drawn our attention to elements of this society that are parts of real history. And, like, there's a lot of attention to this society's piety. But the book also draws attention to the fact that this is a very greedy culture. And, like, there is a huge class inequality here. And the musicians that are children at this school are seen as resources to be exploited and thrown away as the rich and noble want. There are nobles that are shown as kind and gentle and caring, but at the same time, the book directly highlights numerous times how completely at their mercy everyone in the lower class is. And it shows people of different physical abilities, and it shows them as strong, interesting characters, and how they move through the society, while at the same time, it does show how, cruelty and casual cruelty is also part of their lives, and is often, they are treated with casual cruelty. And overall, it does feel like it's painting a picture of a world to us, without ever, like, excusing these elements of the world. And in general, the language does an absolutely spectacular job of, like, settling us into this world and this time period, while never getting to the point of being hard to read. Because, like, yeah, I have read 18th century literature, and this does have the flavor of it. And, like, the heightened language, the, for lack of a better word, flouncy writing, like, lots of focus on little details, lots of, excruciating word choice. Like, there's a lot here that feels accurate, but at the same time, it was readable. There never reached a point that I felt like I was in college again in the 18th century British literature class going, oh my god, I'm never going to get through this book. But it feels Rococo in the right ways without feeling heavy. And yes, it is most noticeable in Carlo's language, but it's also a lot there in the descriptions, and it's a lot there in other characters' language as well. But there is one big element of this book that I've barely mentioned, and that's Celestina. And the reason I haven't brought her up as much is because she just didn't feel like as strong of a character to me. Beyond the fact that she is in a wheelchair, she is vibrant and commanding, but also very intrinsically girly, there's not much there to her. And, like, it's not really a problem that there's not much there to her, because she's just not on the page that much. And the only reason that this feels like a problem at all is it feels like the book was trying to set her up as a strong third to this relationship, that she would be equally important, and yet her actual purpose in the book is that of a sexy lamp. Like, she is just there to be rescued, longed for, and won over. And, like, that's fine. I don't intrinsically see that as a bad thing. But when the book is trying to present her as this incredibly important person, I feel like we would have needed a little bit more time with her, and we just didn't quite get it. Now, that being said, this is listed as part of a series, so hopefully in book 2 we'll get a little bit more of Celestina, and she will feel more like an important character. But other than that, she's just an interesting side character. And part of that is the pacing of this book. I feel like I cannot finish this review without talking about the pacing here, because yeah, the pacing, in my personal opinion, is a flaw. Now, your mileage may vary on this. If you are a person who's more interested in relationships than anything else, you might not find anything wrong with this pacing whatsoever. But for me, it took about 120 pages to get into this book. And for that first 120 pages, I just kept being like, I'm not sure if I want to read this one. Like, oh my god. And the only thing keeping me in it was the fact that the writing is really good. It's really strong, and the characters were interesting. But if I was the editor of this book, I personally would have suggested doing more time skips and summarization in that first 100 pages. Like, some of the relationship building, in my personal opinion, could have read better as just, and then they get to know each other over the next couple of weeks. But that also would have given us more time to see the relationship develop between Carlo and Celestina, and even Tammo and Celestina. Now, in a way, I'm sort of glad we didn't get that, because there's just enough of a hint here that I know that if we got more time with them, it would have evolved more into the jealousy, like, oh, who's going to be more important to who kind of relationship, and I don't like that drama. It's not a drama I'm here for in a relationship. I don't like love triangles, whether they be platonic, asexual, or not. I'm not here for love triangles. And I didn't want to see conflict between the two boys. And so in a lot of ways, I'm happy we didn't spend more time there. But it would have been higher drama, and it would have felt a little bit more like a traditionally paced story. But that means also, yeah, this is not really a high-stakes story. And honestly, I appreciate that. Because, don't get me wrong, I love fantasy. I love books where everyone is fighting to save the world, save the universe, save the country, save their people, whatever. But I also really love stories where the stakes are just the happiness of the two characters, or a few characters, maybe the survival of one character. And that in particular, this book was determined to give us. It wanted us to, like, know that the stakes are their happiness. And it also tries really fucking hard to wrap everything up really tidy in the end, so that everyone gets a little bit of that happiness. We get a little bit of hints of a conclusion for even small minor characters, which is something I do really appreciate in a book. But if I do have one problem with the ending, it was trying a bit too hard to tidy everything up. And like, don't worry, there is some openness here. There is enough that you can see where book 2 would go, but there's a scene in particular that is in the falling action, and it's basically just, hey, this problem, can we have it fixed? Yes. This problem, can we have it fixed? Yes. This problem, can we have it fixed? Yes. And it's just sort of like, okay, that's a bit too quick. And I feel like it would have read a little bit more authentic if we had had a time skip at that point. and gone a couple of, days in the future and have them remembering, oh yeah, this is how I got that, this is how I got that, this is how I got that. I feel like that would have been a slightly more fulfilling falling action for me. But I will say, otherwise the ending is pretty fulfilling. I think in general, this is a really solid book. It's really interesting, it's got some really nice world building, it's got just enough magic that it held my attention, with some really unusual representation and diverse characters in a not more commonly seen way, and it's got really strong characters. It was a gentle, pleasant read, and it might really hit the spot for some readers, though I don't think this is one I'd recommend for everyone. I will say it's incredibly well written, so even if this does sound too soft and relationship building for you, I would suggest checking out this author, Elizabeth Hopkinson's other books. I don't even know if this author has other books, but in general, I think that their writing is really, really strong, and that alone makes me want to read on. So yeah, I don't know if the second book is out, I don't know if there is a second book, I don't know if this author has other books, but I very much enjoyed this one, and I would recommend this author to other readers.